Hello everyone, Interact back again with another entity education video. This time we're going to do a deep dive on the first killer to ever be put into Dead by Daylight, and a killer who holds a special place in my heart since he was the first killer I ever played when I started playing, the Trap Daddy himself, Evan McMillan, better known as the Trapper. Now before we get into how his power works, his strengths and weaknesses, all the details about his add-ons, his teachable perks, and some good setups for playing him, let's just get a few basic stats out of the way. The Trapper has no special characteristics about anything like action speed, movement speed, anything like that. Basically, he is the default for all killers. The Trapper moves at the base movement speed for all killers, 4.6 meters per second, also known as 115%, and 3.68 meters per second, or 92% speed, while carrying a survivor. He has the base vaulting time of 1.7 seconds. For reference, a fast vault for a survivor takes half of a second, and a medium vault is 1 second. And as of patch 2.2.0, all killers have the same lunge speed with still a few exceptions, so obviously he also does, which is a brief 0.3 second acceleration period up to 6.9 meters per second or 158 speed. Essentially, the way that lunges work is, if you've ever used Dead Hard, it's the same thing but with an attack. And his terror radius is the default 32 meters. The Trapper being the first killer added to the game means that his power has a bit of an archaic and overly complicated method to the way that it works. At first it may seem simple. You have traps, you place them down, survivor walks into them, snap, they're trapped. They either untrap themselves, have a teammate help them out of the trap, both of these lead to them becoming injured, or you go over and pick them up and get them to the hook, right? Well, it's a slight bit more complicated than that. When you spawn in as Trapper, you only start with a single bear trap in your inventory by default. This can be changed with add-ons, which we'll cover later, and with 5 other traps randomly spawned around the map in the unset position. This means, in addition to having to find decent places to set up your traps, you have to walk around the map and collect them one at a time, which takes away a lot of time that you could be spending chasing survivors off of generators, getting them on hooks, etc. No other killer has a downside to their power as hefty as this, except for probably Freddy, but we'll get to him in his video eventually. Now, placing a trap has 3 stages: the putting the trap down phase, which takes half of a second, 0.5 seconds, the setting the trap phase, which takes 1.5 seconds, 1.5 seconds at a base time, but can be modified by add-ons, and the standing back up phase, which also takes half of a second, 0.5 seconds. The putting the trap down and standing back up phases are static and unable to be changed in any way, shape, or form. During you setting a trap down, the animation will also be played and shown to survivors if they're looking at you. So keep this in mind if you're trying to hide a trap somewhere. If a survivor sees you, they'll know that there's a trap there. They'll see you bend down and set it. And then they can run up behind you, disarm your trap at a base disarm time of 3.5 seconds. When they do this, you will hear a snap and be able to see a noise notification on your screen, and the aura of your trap will go from set to unset, so you'll know that someone was there disarming your trap. One of the first major issues that you run into playing Trapper is only one of 4 killers in the entire game whose power can be messed with by the survivors. The other 3 being the Hag, the Wraith, and the Nurse, although most people don't actually know about the Nurse's downside, but we'll cover that when we get to her video. If a survivor has the perk Sabotage, or just any plain toolbox, they can sabotage your traps that are on the ground and break them, making them unusable for 3 minutes. This will take the survivor 16 seconds base time if they have a toolbox, and 32 seconds base if they are just using the Saboteur perk at rank 3 with no toolbox. As I said, these traps will respawn after 3 minutes, but 3 minutes is a very long time in a game of Dead by Daylight. And actually in a previous version they used to not respawn at all, which was absolutely horrible, so I'm very glad they changed that. The Hag, on the other hand, just has her trap instantly respawn into her magical power storing voodoo hand? I really have no idea how the Hag's power works. It's voodoo or something in the lore? Whatever, maybe I'll cover that in the Hag video. Another slight issue that you run into with the Trapper is that if an injured survivor runs into a trap and gets untrapped either by struggling themselves out or by getting freed by a friend, they stay in the injured state. Traps don't actually do damage to survivors, they just put the trapped survivor into the injured state. This is kind of a minor thing, but just be aware that if you injure somebody and then they run into a trap, unless you pick them up or hit them while they're in the trap, once they get out of that trap, they will stay injured and be able to run away from you again. The next problem we run into is when the survivor actually gets caught in a trap. They have the ability to untrap themselves with a base rate of a 25% chance of success and a base time of 1.5 seconds per attempt. The issue here is that the rate of untrapping oneself is tied to a survivor's luck stat. It's not actually just a 25% flat rate. It's tied to that weird luck mechanic that can be boosted through offerings and perks and doesn't really make much sense, honestly. Let's say that a plain old Meg, running, standard Meg perks, no add-ons or offerings or whatever, runs into a trap. She just has that flat 25% chance to escape the trap every attempt she makes. On average, you would assume that she would escape probably after 2 attempts. I'll go into deeper math later, don't worry about that. Now let's say you have an ace who is running up the ante 3, a perk that gives him and other survivors on the map 3% more luck per survivor alive for a total of 12% extra luck, because the game just started, you haven't killed anyone yet. And he brought in a Vigo's Jar of Salty Lips offering, which increases all survivors' luck by an extra 3%. I don't know why he would do this, maybe he's running plunderers and trying to farm for items, who knows. This is just a thought experiment. Well, this lucky little ace has a 40% chance to escape the trap on every attempt, bringing his odds of escaping your trap on the first try up substantially. Now, I'm not saying this is bad game design, it just seems odd given how every other killer except for Freddy, but darn, does he need a buff badly, isn't subjected to this much RNG for their power to function. Now, I could break down the binomial math that determines how many attempts it actually would take to untrap yourself, but it's been a while since I took a math class, and probability is just probability, so I'll just put the numbers up on the screen. You'll have to trust me, I actually went through the math for this. Obviously, the Meg's first attempt has a 25% chance of success, as we've said. Her second attempt also has a 25% chance in theory, but based on statistics, on the second attempt, she has a 43.75% chance of escaping. On her third attempt, she has a 57.81% chance of escaping. Her fourth attempt has a 68.36% chance of escape, and her fifth attempt has a 76.27% chance of escape. Basically, if someone attempts to escape your trap with no add-ons and no luck perks, and they don't make it out by the fifth attempt, they're insanely unlucky and should never play the lottery. Now let's check the math for that lucky ace with his extra luck perks and offering. Obviously, his first attempt has a 40% chance of succeeding. However, his second attempt already brings him up to a 64% chance of success, roughly around where the Meg's fourth attempt was, and his third attempt has a 78.4% chance of escape, roughly around where the Meg's fifth attempt was. You can probably see the issue with why self-untrapping being based on luck might be a little off-putting, since it depends on the survivor stats instead of just your own stats. All of this being said, however, if another survivor comes over to their teammate, they can untrap them with a 100% chance of success. Oh well. Also, people don't typically run luck offerings unless they're messing around, but just keep in mind, this will affect your traps. Another downside to the trapper's power is that if you have a survivor on your shoulder and you're carrying them, and you happen to walk into one of your own set traps, you snap your own foot, drop the survivor, they get to run away, and you have to untrap yourself for a brief period of time. So be cognizant of where you have your traps placed, and don't let the wiggle push you into your own traps, because you will drop survivors. Now with all that pesky math and whatnot out of the way, let's get into the trapper's add-ons, which sadly enough does actually include some math. But at least this is more basic algebra and less binomials. The first few are his common add-ons, which are pretty basic. They're common add-ons. The Trapper Sack starts you with an additional bear trap in your inventory and allows you to transport an extra trap up to 2 at a time. This is a nice common add-on to help you with placing your traps around the map faster, since you can carry 2 at a time. You can, place one, then walk over, place another. You don't have to pick them up in between. The next common add-on we get to is the Trapper Gloves, which slightly increase your trap setting speed. Slightly means so many different things in this game that I can't be sure, but the wiki seems pretty confident that slightly in this case means a 25% increase to setting speed, giving you a reduction of 0.375 seconds to your setting phase, making the action in total take 2.125 seconds instead of 2.5 seconds. Next up, we have the Strong Coil Spring, which also slightly increases your bear trap sabotage time and disarm time. What does slightly mean in this case, you ask? Well, without actually data mining the game and having access to their source code, I had to run some tests because the wiki was unclear on this. But it did seem to show that this meant a 25% increase to disarm speed, making it take 4.375 seconds to disarm a trap. Better than I expected, honestly. As far as sabotage time goes, once again, the testing seemed to show that it was a 15% increase in sabotage time, bringing it up to a 18.4 second sabotage time with the toolbox. Next up, we have a slightly odd add-on, the Padded Jaws, which will give you a 100% increase to your blood points when trapping someone at the cost of your traps no longer putting them into the injured state. They're interesting, as I said. Obviously, you can still pick survivors up off the traps and basically skip the whole chase sequence like you normally would. Honestly, there are better ways of farming blood points, but if you want to mess around with this add-on, feel free. Now we move on to the uncommon add-ons, where we'll start off with the trap setters. These will moderately increase your setting speed. Once again, moderately is a word that they use that has no real meaning. But the wiki says that it is a decrease in setting time by 30%, so 0.45 seconds of reduction, bringing your total trap setting time to 2.05 seconds. Pretty good. Next up, we've got Serrated Jaws, which will give survivors injured by a bear trap the hemorrhage status until healed. Now, I did test this. This does not work with one of the later ultra rare add-ons, the Bloody Coil. This is only if they step into the bear trap and get injured by it. Keep that in mind. This means that they will bleed more frequently, leaving behind pools of blood for you to track easier. With a perk like Bloodhound, this can be really nice for tracking, but honestly, you should be picking survivors up out of your traps for the most part, so this add-on won't be extremely useful, although I will put up on screen what bleeding more frequently looks like. Next up, we have one of the more useful add-ons you can actually get, Logwood Dye. What this does is moderately, once again, actually extremely meaningless in this case, it moderately darkens your traps. This can be very useful since the base traps are pretty bright, but with Logwood Dye they're darkened moderately, and therefore harder to spot in tall grass or in general. Always a solid pick for any map that isn't like the game because there's no grass on that, but the trapper on the game sucks anyways, so whatever. The way that this actually works is it changes the hex color of the traps, but don't worry about that. Most people won't even understand what I'm saying when I say that. So just, it makes them darker. There you go. The final uncommon add-on is the 4-coil spring kit, which moderately increases the bear trap sabotage and disarm time. Now, once again, I had to test this, and based on my testing, this seems to equate to a 30% increase in disarm speed, bringing it up to a total of 4.55 seconds to disarm a trap, and a 25% increase in sabotage time, bringing it up to 20 seconds with a toolbox. Now moving on to the rare add-ons for Trapper, we start with the Wax Brick. This add-on moderately reduces the chance to escape a bear trap. What does that mean? Well, based on a previous version of the game that had been data mined, the 4-coil spring kit that we just talked about had that same text that moderately reduces the chance to escape a bear trap. I believe that this decreases the chance from self-untrapping from 25% to 20%, so a 5% increase in difficulty for self-untrapping. I could test this, and I would have to get an actual definitive answer for you without the source code. But the amount of testing that I would have to do to get a good enough sample size to confirm the actual percentage chance for this would be absolutely astronomical, so I'm not going to do it. Behavior. Hit me up if you want to answer my questions about these things or give me access to the code for add-ons or whatever. That'd be very helpful, so I don't have to just assume these things. Thank you. Hit me up on Twitter or something, I guess. Anyways, this add-on can be useful, but it's just RNG on top of RNG, so it's basically a crapshoot. Next up, we have the Logwood Dye's older brother, the Tar Bottle. This considerably darkens the bear trap. Ooh, considerably. That sounds so fancy, doesn't it? Once again, this word is basically meaningless, but here's a picture of what a considerably darkened bear trap looks like. Next up, we've got the Trapper Gloves and Trap Setter's older brother, the Setting Tools. In addition to considerably increasing the bear trap setting speed, this also moderately increases the rescue and escape times from a bear trap. Now, we do know that this decreases the setting speed by 35%, or 0.525 seconds, bringing your total trap time down to a blisteringly fast 1.975 seconds. From some testing that I did, it seems to add a 50% increase to self-untrap time, bringing it up to a total of 2.25 seconds. Honestly, way more than I expected. Next up, we have another add-on with some testing involved, the Secondary Coil. This add-on considerably increases the sabotage time and disarm time. Based on my testing, this seems to be a 47% increase in disarm speed, which is a really weird number, and an odd jump from the previous add-on, which was a 30% increase, and so I would have assumed that it would go up in another increment of 5%. I reached out to one of the people who actually code the game, McLean on Twitter, and asked him to help me confirm this, but he hasn't responded yet. Oh well. But based on my testing, this brings it up to a disarm time of 5.145 seconds. This could be bugged, I don't really know. I tested it twice and got the same exact result, and once again, without the coding, behavior, please hit me up if you want to give me access to that. I can't really be sure if it's a bug or they made it 47% for some reason. As I said, if it followed the pattern, it should have been like a 45% since it's going in increments of 5, but I don't know. I was a bit skeptical that I had made a mistake, so I retested it and got the same exact result, which is 47%, which, I don't know, it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. It also seems to be a 35% increase to sabotage time, bringing it up to 21.6 seconds to sabotage with a toolbox, double that if you're doing Saboteur. And the final add-on for Trapper, and one that has moderately in the description, and it literally means nothing, I'm not even joking, it literally means nothing, is the Rusted Jaws. This add-on makes survivors injured by the bear trap suffer moderately, which means nothing, from the Mangled status effect. The Mangled status effect is just an effect that exists until you get healed. It moderately doesn't mean anything, I don't know why they put that in there. All of that aside, the Mangled status effect slows down your healing speed by 20%. This may be changed in a future patch. If it is, I'll try and put an annotation on the screen or something to actually tell you what the heck it does now. This can be extremely useful if you're not running Sloppy Butcher, because slowing down healing speed slows down the game. Next, we move on to the very rare add-ons, most of which are just better versions of add-ons that we've already seen. We start with the Stitched Bag, which starts you off with 2 extra traps and lets you transport up to 3 at a time. Pretty handy for getting things set up early and quickly, and transporting things all around the map when you need to move all your traps. Pretty good. Solid choice. Then we have the Oily Coil, a super buff version of the secondary coil. This tremendously increases the disarm time and sabotage time. Based on my testing, this seems to be a 50% increase to disarm speed, bringing it up to 5.25 seconds to disarm a trap. That's insane. It also seems to be a 45% increase to sabotage time, bringing it up to 23.2 seconds to sabotage without a toolbox, double that for Saboteur. Then we have a nice unique add-on, the Honing Stone. This add-on makes it so that if a survivor untraps themselves, not if they're rescued, if they untrap themselves, it will put them into a dying state instead of just the injured state. This can be extremely useful for getting some early slugging done, but a coordinated team will only fall prey to this add-on once or twice. It may buy you some extra time to actually get to the trapped survivor if they don't have a friend nearby to get them out and they don't want to go into a dying state. Just be wary that if you're planning on running this add-on, even though it can be extremely powerful because it forces them to untrap each other, it may not really work the way you wanted it to if you're up against a coordinated team. And the last of the very rares that we come to is the Fastening Tools, the big boy version of the setting tools. The actual percentage speed isn't data mined on the wiki, but based on my testing and the trend of 5% per add-on, I assume that this one decreases your setting time by 40% or 0.6 seconds. That would bring it to a total time to set down a trap of 1.9 seconds. Very good. Based on my testing, it also adds 60% to self-untrap time, bringing it up to 2.4 seconds. Moderately reducing the chance to escape, we already assumed was 5%, and as I talked about, I can't spend the time testing that. It would take forever to get a good enough sample size to feel comfortable saying anything otherwise. Super amazing add-on, as you would expect from a very rare. Behavior, please, I'm begging you, hit me up or give me access to the code or something. I really want to have hard numbers. I don't want to keep saying, oh, I assume, in these videos. Please, thank you. I'm planning on making videos for all the killers, so just, can you please respond to me? I love you, thank you. Lastly, we get into the ultra rare add-ons for Trapper. The Trapper, like most killers, has 2 ultra rare add-ons, the Iridescent Stone and the Bloody Coil. The Iridescent Stone is an easy enough add-on to understand, but extremely powerful. Every 30 seconds, one of your traps that is closed becomes set. It chooses at random, but keep in mind that it can only pick closed bear traps, ones that aren't set, and if you have a bunch that are placed and haven't been disarmed, it's going to choose one of the ones that you haven't picked up and set yet. This can lead to some very interesting trap placements that survivors will not see coming because you didn't even see it coming because you didn't place it. Either way, this add-on is amazing for Trapper, especially if used in conjunction with the other ultra rare, the Bloody Coil. The Bloody Coil makes it so if any of your traps are disarmed or sabotaged by a healthy survivor, the survivor becomes injured. It also slightly increases the sabotage and disarm time, but let's be honest, the injure part is what you're really bringing this in for. Injuring survivors normally wastes a lot of time in a chase, so having your traps injure them just because they either disarm the trap and get injured, or walk into it and get injured, or walk into it and get picked up and hooked, is a godsend for Trapper. Now that we've gone over the Trapper's power and add-ons, let's talk a bit about how you should be using it, in my opinion. Obviously, there's no right or wrong way to use a power, this is just how I feel about it. The standard way that most people will use bear traps is to place them in front of pallets and at windows to catch people who are trying to loot. While these are completely fine places to put traps, and you could catch a fair amount of survivors with them, let me talk about the thing that drew me to Trapper in the first place when I started playing, when I had the choice between him, the Wraith, or the Hillbilly. I'm of course talking about the Trapper's ability to punish survivors if you can read the survivors and see into the future almost of where they're going to go. Now bear with me, this might sound a little crazy, but you should play the Trapper like a real life hunter. I have never personally been hunting in my life, but I know a lot of friends who have been hunting, and I read a lot. And if you know anything about hunting, you might have heard the term game trails. Basically, if you are like me and you don't actually hunt at all, a game trail is a path worn into nature by animals. Animals are creatures of habit, much like survivors. Animals will constantly use the same game trails over and over again, wearing paths into the woods and into the fauna because they perceive them to be the best paths to use to get to water or feeding grounds or whatever. Now, you might be wondering, why am I even rambling about this? Well, in Dead by Daylight, once you've played long enough, as I said, survivors are creatures of habit. You might start to notice that there are quote-unquote game trails for survivors. They aren't something you can tangibly see, but there are paths that good survivors will take because they are the quote-unquote optimal paths to take to get to certain loops or safe windows. Once you've played enough and you can read these game trails, you should be able to find some tall grass on the trail, drop a trap down on them, and maybe pick up a free trap that they don't see coming and don't disarm. Typically the best place to put these are on choke points, like between two trees or near jungle gyms, things like that. This won't always work, since as I said, survivors are creatures of habit, but they're human, they think they evolve a lot quicker than animals. And this typically only works at higher ranks once the survivors have enough game time to know these optimal routes to get and how to loop this, how to get there, what window is the best window, all that stuff. But when I play, I always try and place at least 1 or 2 traps on these game trails, and they tend to work out pretty well and catch people even at rank 1. A good way to learn these is either watching high-level survivors, streamers, playing Survivor at a high rank yourself, so you learn the optimal loops of how to survive, things like that. Now, while I believe this technique is really strong, since most survivors will just be looking for traps at your typical choke points, pallets, windows, the infinite window, the combine, whatever, things like that. If you can get a good handle of these game trails of the survivors, you might be able to get a few extra traps per game. If a game lasts long enough, you might even start to notice patterns of how the 4 specific survivors in your game move around the map, so you can adjust your trap placements if they aren't going the way that you expected them to. You can adjust your gameplay on the fly based on what you're seeing. If you can master reading the survivors, you should be able to snap up even some of the highest ranked survivors. Now, as I said, I tend to do this. You can check out my stream if you want, but if you want to watch a Trapper player who is honestly better than me, and one of the best Trapper players I've ever seen, and employs something along the lines of this crazy theory that I've named. It's not my theory, but I called it game trails or whatever. Check out the Entity Left Hand on Twitch TV. He's a bit,
Run. We said run.
eccentric might be a word for it. But as I said, he's a damn good Trapper player, and you might be able to pick up on some good trap spots from watching him. Now that we've gone over my crazy game trail theory thing, let's talk about some less crazy placements for your traps. One of the most obvious places to put a trap is the window of the Killer Shack. If you've played Killer at all, you know the Killer Shack window is looped and looped and looped and looped all day long. This one will probably get disarmed pretty quickly, but if it doesn't, it will save you a lot of time on someone trying to loop that Killer Shack. This is a pretty high risk, high reward trap placement. As I said, most survivors will check it before they start looping it, but you might be able to force them to go somewhere else or catch them unaware. The other typical place to put traps is right in front of pallets. Now, as a quick note, do not under any circumstances place your trap in the middle of the pallet. The survivors, if they're smart and they understand this, will just drop the pallet down and slide over your trap, rendering it completely worthless. As another note, most pallets on maps that don't suck, aka anything that isn't the game, have grass on one side of the pallet, so try to aim your traps on the grassy side so they're harder to see. Since, as I've said, most survivors will be looking for traps in these two spots under the windows or by the pallets, another way to place traps is by placing what I'm going to call like a metagame trap, or traps that will cut off loopers. Let's say you're on a farm map, right? I'll bring up a little diagram here. And you know that survivors are going to loop the cow tree because it's extremely safe and wastes a lot of time. Or they're going to loop the that T-wall, L-wall combination. I'll put up another little diagram. You can place the typical trap at the window vault, but they'll probably be expecting that and disarm it. So if they've seen it and disarmed it, they'll think, okay, this loop is safe. So what you do is you place that window trap that they'll be expecting, but you also place a trap in the grass along the loop route. Put up another diagram for that one. As I said, they'll disarm that window trap and go, okay, this is a safe loop now. I'm going to start running it. Then they'll hit that trap, hopefully, and you might be able to snag a free quick trap, pickup, and hook. If you're running a quick placement add-on, or an add-on that lets you carry more than one trap at a time, you can place traps at the loops while the survivors are trying to run it, but keep in mind that they will definitely see you doing this and they will probably just take the time that you're placing your trap to run to another pallet or window. This should really only be done on spots that you know are absolutely safe pallets or horrible window loops and take forever for you to catch up, because you're probably not going to catch them with this trap. You're probably just going to force them to move to the next loop. As I said, save this for the spots that you know you'll gain time from cutting off that extremely safe loop and forcing them to one that's maybe not as safe. Another thing that we should discuss is evolving the state of your traps based on the state of the game. Obviously, if the game has been going on for a while, some pallets have been thrown down, some generators have been done, some of the traps that you set in the beginning of the game may become obsolete. You should endeavor, when you have time and you've already pressured the survivors, you've got someone on hook, other people are injured, to go and pick these obsolete traps up and move them to the new portion of the map that is being used. As I said, this will take a lot of time, but you can potentially make up for it if you find the right opportunity to do it by having a higher trap density in the actual usable area of the map that the survivors are currently playing with. Now, having said all of this, there isn't a right or wrong way to place a trap. I mean, I guess there is a wrong way of never placing a trap at all and just M1ing everybody, but I guess that's a strategy too. Any trap that you have set down has at least some chance of catching a survivor, and it really depends on how observant the survivors are. Everything that I've gone over really applies mostly to survivors that have been playing the game for a while, are decently high rank, and know how to play against the trapper. Sometimes, if you place a trap right out in the open, they just won't be paying attention. They won't see it, they won't expect it, and you'll snap them right up. In general though, you'll want to try and place traps in tall grass where you can hide it, or in doorways or windows where they really don't have any other option to go through it. Another way to use traps is as an information tool. Obviously, unless the survivor wants to get trapped and injure themselves, they'll disarm the traps when they come across them. If you place extremely obvious traps, like ones right in front of the exit gate's power lever or near generators, they'll disarm them and you'll know, hey, they're on this generator, hey, they're on that exit gate, I don't need to defend this one, I should move over. And you might be surprised, sometimes people don't check extremely obvious spots and will get snapped up, and you'll get some free hooks and blood points. Now, let's go over the Trapper's 3 teachable perks. At level 30, you'll unlock the Teachable for Unnerving Presence. At level 35, you'll unlock the Teachable for Brutal Strength. And at level 40, you'll unlock the Teachable for Agitation. Unnerving Presence will make any survivor within your terror radius have a 6/8/10% greater chance of triggering a skill check when repairing, healing, or sabotaging. That's important, remember that. Repairing, healing, or sabotaging. This does not affect Decisive Strike. And these triggered skill check zones will be reduced by 40/50/60%. Once again, does not affect Decisive Strike. They are not repairing, healing, or sabotaging. I wish it did. Sadly, it does not. Brutal Strength will make you destroy dropped pallets and kick generators 10/15/20% faster, making it take a total of 2.34/2.21/2.08 seconds to break a pallet, and 1.8/1.7/1.6 seconds to kick a generator. I'll put that up on the screen because that's a lot of slashes and a lot of dots. Agitation will give you a 6/12/18% increase to your movement speed and a 6/8/12 meter increase to your terror radius while carrying a survivor. Now, let's talk about what these perks are useful for and which ones are actually worth using and which ones are basically you should just ignore them. First, let's start off with Unnerving Presence. This perk is very good at lower ranks, with the added perk Distressing, which increases your terror radius, to make survivors have difficult skill checks that they'll miss every once in a while and get you some free generator regression or some free information. But once you start getting to the higher ranks, survivors are probably going to be going for great skill checks anyways, or landing at least near the great skill check, so Unnerving Presence's usefulness goes down significantly the higher the rank you get. And as I said, it does not make Decisive Strike skill check any harder, but it sure would be nice if it did, behavior. Oh well. Next, let's talk about Brutal Strength, and I'm sorry to say that there is some more math involved with this one because, math. It's a game of seconds, a game of inches, a game of math. Now, considering that the default pallet break time is 2.6 seconds, and the default generator kick time is 2 seconds, a gain of about half of a second from both actions isn't really that big, so Brutal Strength isn't a worthwhile perk. Now, bear with me. If you were to break 12 pallets in a match, which is a lot of pallets, but that's roughly an average for my games at high rank, this would be a gain of 6.24 seconds from running Brutal Strength and kicking these pallets. You'd be better suited just not respecting the pallets, running Enduring, and swinging through all of them, since doing so would net you 10.8 seconds in that same game of 12 pallets, as well as possibly helping you catch some of those DS users' Decisive Strike quicker and landing some hits on survivors that don't expect you to swing through the pallets or don't see you swinging through the pallets, or the game just has that weird hitbox glitch where it just lets you hit them through the pallet even though you're stunned because coding. If you don't have Enduring unlocked, Brutal Strength is an okay alternative to kind of speeding up getting through pallets, but if you have the choice between the two of them, Brutal Strength is going to lose out on which one should be taken. You should take Enduring. As a quick, kind of meme note, this perk does stack with Fire Up, one of Freddy's perks, and I'll throw the math up on the screen really quickly, and I'm not going to go through it because it's just a meme. But if for some reason you want to run the meme build of Fire Up and Brutal Strength, just slam those pallets to the ground, go for it. You're probably just wasting 2 perk slots, but hey, enjoy your quick pallet breaking. And lastly, we get to Agitation. As I said at the start of the video, the default movement speed while carrying a survivor is 3.68 meters per second or 92%. With Agitation, you go up to 3.9/4.12/4.34 or 97.5/103/108.5 speed while carrying a survivor. This can be really helpful for getting survivors to farther away hooks or the basement if you want to put them down there. The place where this perk really shines though is against teams that are sabotaging hooks or trying to body block you from getting them to the hook. Since you move faster, it'll make up that extra time that you're taking, slapping them over the head. Or maps with really bad hook placement like the swamp maps, which are thankfully getting buffed by getting shrunk. This extra speed will buy you a lot of extra time in the long run, and it's a pretty good perk on any killer that you might think you're gonna have some trouble getting people to hooks because of the map selection or the people that you're playing. Now let's go over some possible builds you might want to use while playing the Trapper. Typically, when it comes to perks, you'll want to use perks that shore up your killer's weaknesses instead of worrying about making the things that they excel at already better. Now, for this first build, let's assume that you just got the game, the only killer you've put points into and leveled up is the Trapper, meaning you have access to just his 3 unique perks and all of the base perks that killers get while leveling up their blood webs. It's a little hard to make a build for this, but a decent build for this might be something like Whispers, Sloppy Butcher, Agitation, and Hex No One Escapes Death. Oh my god, I know, he said use Noed. Oh no, Toxic. Use whatever perks you want to. Don't let anyone tell you you can't use a perk, okay? This build aims to give you some way of finding survivors through the use of Whispers, a way to slow the game down a bit through Sloppy Butcher, since the mangled effect will make them take longer to heal, and it'll, maybe help you out a little bit with tracking because they'll bleed a little bit more, and a way to get to the hooks quickly so you can find more survivors to take out through the use of Agitation, and the endgame possibility with Noed, since you don't really have a way of slowing down survivors on generators with this build outside of just hooking them. A quick note about this build, however, survivors typically expect a few certain killers to be running Noed at certain ranks, and Trapper happens to be one of those killers because he doesn't really have an endgame. So if you're worried about them cleansing all of your totems and Noed being a dead perk slot, maybe use something like Bitter Murmur instead to give you a little bit better ability to track down survivors. I don't really think Bitter Murmur is a great perk, but if you're using just the Trapper's perks and just the base perks, there isn't really much else to run. Now, let's assume that you have every perk unlocked on all killers, all teachables. Essentially, all killer builds right now, with very few exceptions, start off with 2 perks, Barbecue and Chili, and Hex Ruin. These perks are just insanely good at what they do, and extremely hard to replace. Now, assuming this, a Trapper build might look something like this: Barbecue and Chili, Hex Ruin, Enduring, and Spirit Fury. This build gives you the ability to track people down with Barbecue, plus that extra BP isn't too shabby, it's really good. And the ability to, hopefully, slow down the game a bit so you can get your traps and whatnot set up in the form of Hex Ruin, although it may go down in the first 10 seconds, it may last the entire game. Who knows? It's so fun, right? And the ability to make looping waste less time for you by being able to swing through pallets and break the occasional one with Enduring and Spirit Fury. You might consider using Bamboozle over Spirit Fury, but the Trapper can cut off window loops pretty well with their bear traps, so typically you'd be more concerned with pallet looping. Another build that you might want to try if you don't think that one's very good is something like Barbecue and Chili, Hex Ruin, yeah I know, we all start out with these 2, Sloppy Butcher, and Nurse's Calling. While this build will make you slightly worse at the pallet loops, since you won't have Enduring, you'll get stunned a little bit longer, and you won't have Spirit Fury, so you'll have to actually break that 3rd pallet. If you think you can trap them off well enough to not be too concerned about your loops, Sloppy Butcher plus Nurse's Calling will give you a decent amount of extra time to slow the game down on top of Ruin, and you'll be able to see them through walls when they're healing and maybe pick up a few easy downs and hooks. Now you may be noticing that the aim of all of these builds is to slow the game down, since Trapper is not the best killer at pressuring survivors off of generators with his power or anything like that, but he isn't too concerned with finding ways to instantly down survivors, since picking them up off of a trap is a free down and a free hook. As I said, you typically want to shore up your weaknesses and keep your strengths where they are. Now, if you're looking for more perks to use, maybe you don't like these builds, I'll just throw out a few ideas of something to use. If you want something to help with the endgame, as I said, Hex No One Escapes Death, or Noed, that's toxic, is a very common perk to be used, but something like Blood Warden might also be a consideration. I'm not personally a big fan of the perk Blood Warden. I'll come out and say this now, I guess, just get it out in the air. The perk seems pretty feast or famine to me, which is to say, when it's good, it's insanely good, and when it doesn't work, it does literally nothing, kind of like Noed. But some people swear by it as their go-to endgame perk, so hey, if you think Blood Warden's good, throw some Blood Warden in your build. You could even consider running something like Remember Me to slow down the gates, I don't know. I don't typically like Freddy's perks at all, I think they're pretty bad. Another good perk, if you're not too confident in your ability to actually use your traps and catch people, might be Make Your Choice. It'll get you insta-downs on altruistic survivors to make up for the fact that you maybe aren't catching people in your traps, but typically you run Make Your Choice on a killer who has a mobility power to be able to get back to the hook faster, since you have to be a certain distance away. So you run it on people with the mobility to get back quickly to get that insta-down. Trapper doesn't have that, but it's still a decent perk to get you some insta-downs. And that is the Trapper video for this episode of Entity Education. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like, leave a comment with what I should improve about this series. You know, the next video is obviously going to be on the Wraith. I'm just going to kind of go down the list. The nurse video is going to be a pain for me because I'm awful at her. But I'll do it anyways. So leave a comment with things that I can improve about these videos, things you want to know more about a killer maybe. Maybe I didn't cover this or that, or you want to know, you know, more builds, or talk less about the add-ons, or less about their speed, I don't know, less math. Subscribe for more in the future. As I said, I'm going to be running down every killer. Once the new patch comes out where they change a bunch of perks, I'll be doing all of the perks as well. I might just do those in single bite-sized videos that I can update quickly if they change a certain perk. Leave a comment if you want that. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch if you want to see when I'm live streaming. Basically, Dead by Daylight's one of the only games that I live stream, so I'll probably be playing Killer or just messing around and survive with friends with my friends. But hey, you know, come hang out, chill, ask me questions if you need to. But as I said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.